Hello, everyone. My name is Tyler Constable, sales engineer here at Avantra, and welcome to our first of many live drop-in sessions. Today, we're going to be talking about zero-touch automation. And what does that mean in an SAP environment? Go ahead and share my screen here. So with zero-touch automation, really this is rethinking SAP technical operations. There's a lot behind this. So let's get moving here. Now, I think we're scheduled for 30 minutes today. I don't know if we'll actually get to the full 30 minutes. We'll be covering these topics here. What exactly is zero-touch automation? When is it used? We'll go through some real-world examples. And actually hop into the Avantra system and see how we can actually set up some of this automation. Every single example we've got listed out here, but we'll get through as many as we can. All right, so what is zero-touch automation? Now, typically when we think of automation, we think of something being monitored, something being watched, and then there's typically an approval process where someone's going to say, yeah, okay, we see that something is occurring. Perhaps someone gets notified or they need some kind of approval. With ServiceNow, this is really nice. Essentially, there can be workflow processes where certain people can do different approvals. Then it goes to an automation platform once that approval takes place. The resolution then happens, and then typically we notify or track on that as well. But what we're talking about today with zero-touch automation is really jumping over that approval process. Now, that's not always a good thing. Really, every organization is different in this. Some may not allow this. Some may allow it to certain degrees. All right, so from a high level, just a really simple example is if you're in an SAP environment, which is in high availability, so you've got one SAP system over, let's say, 2 nodes or 2 servers, having that capability where the SAP system itself can hop between the 2 different nodes on its own is really, there's not much approval process there. It's just kind of doing that automatically. Whereas a disaster recovery scenario or a DR scenario, you might want to have approval, right? You might not want to declare a disaster recovery right away. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I think typically best practice is someone's going to say, yeah, let's do this. Let's pull the plug in. Let's move into our disaster recovery spot. So we're going to think about through some other scenarios now. So now with IaaS or the public cloud coming solutions like Avantra coming into play, and start to not only think about these scenarios in HADR environments, but also in other SAP scenarios as well. So first things first, let's talk about monitoring. I know this isn't the most fun thing in the world, but really, if you don't have a good foundation of monitoring, there's no way you're going to be able to automate. If you don't have capabilities of seeing what's happening in your environment, you're not going to be able to automate anything at all, right? Because there's nothing getting to the intelligence, nothing getting to the automation platform to do that. So when we're thinking about monitoring for automation, it's important to note that we want to be looking at SAP itself. We want to be looking directly at the database and at the OS as well. We do not want to be going into SAP and using SAP solutions to go back down and look at the database and the OS, right? Such like CCMS, or maybe there's monitoring solutions that are piggybacked off of CCMS. Not that CCMS is bad, but really what that allows you to do then is if you automate at the SAP layer and something, let's say you're going to take the system down and you want to stop SAP. Well, as soon as you stop SAP, you can no longer see the database or see the OS. So you don't want to have a middleman in there. You want to be looking right at the database, right at the OS as well. And you do want to look at the full stack, like I just said. So we're looking at SAP at the application layer. That's the central instance, primary instance, however you want to name that. And then all additional application servers, all of that involved. Or if it's business objects or tracks or Java system, what have you, we still want to look at that SAP application layer. Again, we're looking just kind of what we were talking about before. We're looking directly at the database and OS, and then we also want to take a look at the public clouds as well. Now, I don't know if your particular organization or your scenario is in public cloud, but there's some great ASIC research. There's I can't remember the stats off the top of my head, but we find that the majority of organizations are running in some kind of hybrid environment right now, where they may still have some systems on premise and some systems up in the cloud. And it's also important to note when monitoring, don't forget the non-SAP things as well, right? So when we talk about SAP, like an organization is running SAP, it's more than just SAP, right? There's interfaces to banks. There's maybe backup solutions or homegrown solutions or third-party databases to other CRM systems, what have you, that may not be SAP. Every scenario is different. Everyone that's been in the SAP world knows that every organization you walk into that's running SAP is running things that non-SAP as well, and it's every scenario is different. So don't forget those non-SAP things as well. It's very, very important. You want to be keeping an eye on those as well, and that might help manage automation within SAP as well. Now, from the automation platform itself, really this is the heart of the automation intelligence. This is where we're going to take that monitoring data and convert it from just watching and alerting to actually doing something, right? So whatever that is, we'll talk through some scenarios in a few minutes, but this engine is the heart of the automation intelligence. So in here, you want to look for trends. If automation is kicking off every Monday, and you can start to look at, well, what's actually going on here? This is where you're going to manage your scripts. So all the scripts that are going to be involved in your automation are all going to come through this platform. And today, when we go through some examples, we're actually going to be using Avantra for that. Now, when we start to get into the resolution phase, really it depends, how you can automate. It really depends on what you're looking at. So first things first, kind of at the top, you've got the SAP application itself. Best practice is to utilize SAP code. And what I mean by that is if we're just talking about, say, an ABAP stack here. So we're talking about ABAP. You don't want to code best practice scenarios, don't want to code in your automation system and then come back in through, let's say, Java and try to call in from that scenario. It's best to have things built within the ABAP stack itself, perhaps as an event, and then have the automation stack be able to go in and call that event ID directly. If that is not available for whatever case, last case scenario, you can code on the automation platform itself. Again, I would really shy away from that if possible. Now, from the database side of things, obviously you come in via SQL scripting, so you'll need direct access to the database. And then from the OS side of things, there's a couple of different ways you can call scripts for automation. You can either have a script sitting on the operating system itself that the automation platform can then call into and call that script, or you can run the script directly from the automation platform. Now, there's different viewpoints on this, and I guess I'll give just a couple different things. So first off, if you do have scripts on all the operating systems, that means that all those scripts have to be maintained. So if you update them, hopefully you've got a good way to update all of your scripts, and hopefully don't forget anything or anything like that. Also, running scripts from the automation platform, the plus side is you just have to update it once, and that hopefully will be able to go throughout all of your environment. However, some organizations from a security standpoint do not allow this as well. So you'd have to talk to your security teams and see if that's something that's allowed in the first place. Lastly is the public cloud itself. Again, this is all going to be API driven. The cool thing about this, whether you're talking Google Cloud, AWS, Azure, or even Alibaba, is a lot of the stuff comes out of the box. It's just being able to go in and call it. So some really nice areas there. Then lastly, the ability to notify and track. So this is oftentimes forgotten when you start thinking about automation is, well, the automation is done, then what? Well, did you know that it occurred, right? So some scenarios might be you actually want to get a notification on your phone. Some might be just send an email, or some might be that you don't necessarily care, but it just still be tracked. So maybe you can send it to a ticketing system, send it to ServiceNow for tracking, or whatever incident management solution you're watching. So at least you can see that's being tracked. And again, you can start to look for trends, right? Because the key is with automation is it may not always be the best resolution. Maybe there's an underlying cause or an underlying something that's actually causing some symptoms, and then you're going to automate the symptoms. You don't want to do that. So if you start to see things that are occurring, hey, every morning at 7 in the morning, all of the metrics seem to spike, and we need to scale up on the public cloud all the resources. Well, maybe there's something that's going on in the middle. Maybe someone's running a big report, or there's some coding, or so there might be something underlying to take a look at it as well. And the other thing is, always be audit prepared. I think that's key when you're starting to think automation. So, make sure you're tracking everything that's going on. All right, so in the scenario of zero-touch automation, when we're not going to go ask for approval, when should this be used? Now, typically this is used for mundane tasks, right? Things that are just time killer tasks that have really, this is zero value. Really, I guess the idea is it's going to have some sort of value if that's why you're automating it. But really, for the person that is manually going out and doing it, you're taking them away from something that they should be focusing on. Right? So this could disrupt their day, or maybe it's, well, we always do this at 4 o'clock before we leave to go home, right? And that's never, the way we always do things. That's not something you want to do as well. And then, where there might be an underlying resolution, there may not be a known or available resolution available right away. So, and maybe it's not big enough to require approval. When should it not be used? Obviously, when something requires approval. So from a finance standpoint, maybe automatically standing up additional servers in the public cloud may need financial approval, or if there is an underlying issue, let's check that out first. So some real world examples, a couple more slides, and we'll actually get into the system, start looking at some of these. So from the SAP application there, again, we'll start at the top and work our way down. Perhaps there's an important batch job that fails. And when it fails, there's approval from the business that they say, just go out and rerun it. Now, again, this is not always a scenario that you might have a zero-touch scenario in here. This might typically probably, hey, a notification to someone saying, hey, that this failed, should we go rerun it? Someone pushes yes, and then have automation platform go rerun it. But there might be a scenario where they just say, hey, just rerun this job if it fails. So essentially, the job fails. The monitoring solution says, hey, this failed. It goes to the automation platform, says, okay, I'm going to rerun it, and goes out and reruns it. So in the Avantra world, all in one scenario, Avantra recognizes that the job, particularly this particular job failed, goes out and reruns that job. And again, it's not going to do that by coding within the Avantra system itself. It's going to go call an event ID within the ABAP stack itself. Database, a very simple example, which really isn't really relevant, but just extending a table space, again, you can probably do that right out of, if you're talking Oracle, you can do it right out of there itself. But there's other database health cleanup things that can be going on as well. From an operating system, there might be some file system cleanup. Again, this is probably a scenario where you may have some kind of approval in there, but there might be scenarios where you say, hey, if there's this one specific file or one specific directory, and if there's files that are 30 days or older and it's filling up over 90% full, go ahead and wipe things out over 30 days older. There might be some scenarios like that as well. So keep an eye out for those. From the public cloud, I think we all know here we can do scaling. Now, again, a lot of this is already built when we talk about scaling up and scaling down. We're taking that same server and we're just adding more resources and taking it away from there. And then we get into what I call cross stack. When we start to talk about the full stack, but we're doing it across different areas, right? So kind of what we talked about earlier, we need to make sure that we're plugged into both, the SAP, the database OS, and the public clouds themselves, because there might be scenarios whereas we're running out of work processes, right? So just for any non-technical people that may be on today, work process is a little work engine within the SAP layer itself. If there's not enough of those, essentially the system comes to a halt until they free up, and then essentially it just kind of builds up from there. So we can call out to maybe, let's say this maybe there's an additional application server off to the side sleeping. Let's stand up that server, so essentially at the public cloud layer, and then stand up that additional SAP application layer from there. So it's going to have essentially do two different things at once. That's kind of the scale up from that particular example. Now, the other scenario is there might be planned zero-touch automation. And what I mean by that is you may have a scenario where you've got an automation platform that's going to go out and it's got a certain workflow to do, whatever that is. We're thinking maybe kernel updates. Perhaps this is, we want to shut down all of our non-production systems every weekend, right? Things like that. And then we want to make sure that the monitoring essentially comes later at this point, because it's saying, well, hey, did it do what it was supposed to do? And then if not, or if it did, track that. So again, some examples here, and this is more meant for when you're talking about that full stack or cross stack, and there's different components that need to come down in a specific order, right? So OS patching. So essentially, again, we're going to stop SAP, stop the database, run a script to do the OS patching, bring the database back up, bring SAP back up, right? It's it has to happen in a very specific order. Same thing we just talked about, maybe to help control cloud costs. Maybe you want to shut down all non-production SAP systems. Obviously, that's going to be the database as well, and then shut down those particular servers as well. And then lastly, kernel patching. There's all kinds of other examples as well. And again, this needs to be coordinated between OS, database, and SAP. So with that, I'm going to actually hop into our Avantra system, and we'll actually walk through a couple of these examples. So I'm going to head into the system itself. Now, if you've never seen Avantra before, this is what we jumped right into our automation part. Now, this is we can get into all of the monitoring of the systems and looking at so on and so forth. But for today's sake, we head right into our automations. And first thing we're going to do is we're going to go through a scenario of, let's go through that starting and stopping of non-production systems. So let's stop non-prod and public cloud servers Friday for the weekend, right? So we'll pick our customer here, then it's going to pick here. Select create. All right, so now on the bottom, what you see are our steps. Go in a certain order. So first thing we're going to do here is we're just going to say stop, let's say our BW systems first and servers. So I'll come in here and I'll select our SAP system, database, and servers. So again, this would mean the Google Cloud server, AWS server, Alibaba server, Azure server. And then we select the servers now, or the system itself. Now, again, this is going to do SAP system, all additional application servers, database, so on and so forth. Now we can even split it up if we wanted to, or say, bring down all my application servers first, then do the primary instance, then do the database. We can even get that granular as well. But for this example here, we'll just say it's the system itself. Now this is one system. It could be 50 systems, 100 systems, could be in this case just one system. If this fails, I'm going to have it stop. I don't want it to continue. Next step is we're going to stop ECC, non-prod. You can see here, and again, same scenario. We'll just stop the servers as well. Okay, and if this fails, again, we'll just have it stop. Again, this is one server, one system, or 100 or 1,000. It doesn't really matter here, and we'll have it stop here if it fails. And then we'll activate that schedule. So we'll come in here, and I'm going to say, my schedule, have it be reoccurring at 7:15 at night, I guess, weekly at Friday. We'll have it kick off at 7 o'clock on Friday night. And then I'll have another scenario Monday morning at 2 in the morning, having to bring everything back up again. All right, so that's the one scenario here. Really, that would help cut down on cloud costs. Used a lot, not only for non-productions over the weekend, but it might also be in a very, very large system. Let's say you've got a huge S4 system with tons of application servers, just as an example here. And you don't need all those resources between the hours of 5 p.m. and 3 in the morning, right? So you can actually shut all those down. The system is still up and running. Maybe the primary application server and 3 app servers are still up and running. Another 10 are down until the business is back up in the next morning. So all different kinds of examples. You can use that in a global environment as well. I'm sure you can start to think of a lot of different use cases for your own environment. Now, the other way this could be done, and I'm actually just going to go ahead and delete these, is now that's a planned scenario. Let's talk about a non-planned scenario. So in my system here, and again, if you're not familiar with Avantra, what I'm doing is I'm going into one particular SAP system. I'm looking at the monitoring of the real-time monitoring. So this is a HANA-based environment. All of these checks come out of the box natively as soon as you plug in. But essentially, Avantra here recognizes that there's not enough dialogue work processes. Right? So this is that scenario where these are the little work engines, and if they fill up, essentially the system can come to a halt. As you can see, things are not looking great. So Avantra can then recognize that happened, and then go out and have a scenario where it's going to start, just say Google, and no, it could be anything but start Google server. Let's go here, let's go down to our start cloud server, select that server that we're talking about, whatever that is, and then we're going to start the actual additional application server as well. Start additional app server, and away we go now with the additional instance as well. So start the SAP instance, and there we go. Now we will have more additional application servers as soon as Avantra recognizes that it's running out of them. So again, point and click, pretty easy. This is gonna apply when that check goes into critical status. That will trigger this automation. Now again, going back to OS level patching. So here's an example of an OS patch cycle. Essentially, here you can see it's stopping the SAP system and database. It's going to run an OS command to patch the OS. It's going to reboot the actual server itself. Once it recognizes that the server is back up and that the Avantra agent is back up again, it's going to go ahead and start everything back up. So you can even get down to OS level patching in this scenario as well. Now, one other area we had discussed is, doing that, did a batch job fail or a specific batch job. So within Avantra, we can do very, very granular specifics with batch jobs and IDocs, all different kinds of things, right? But just for this example, a particular job fails. That's very important to us. So we'll have that identified, that particular job through the checks, kind of like what we're looking at back here in the particular checks here. And a particular job fails here. And that particular job calls the automation. The automation itself is, I'll delete these and just go through this. Let's say I always have to use the example of a payroll job, right? Now, I don't think we would automatically run that one. There might be an approval in there, but let's say for some reason that's what the business wants. So we're going to do rerun failed payroll job. And again, we're not going to code on this outside of SAP. We're going to go back in and call an event. So trigger an event. And here, this is just, rerun, it's the event ID on this particular system. And if it fails, we'll have a retry, right? So now this is now being triggered as well. So it doesn't have to be on a schedule. It can just be run from that perspective as well. The last thing here that we can, outside of OS level patching, we're talking a lot about SAP here. Again, this could also be database layer. It could be OS layer. It could be non-SAP things. It could be completely unrelated to SAP. Maybe there's some OS level thing you want to do. All that can be brought into here as well. Last thing here I'm going to show you though is the ability to say do kernels, right? So kernel patching, very, very important. Again, this is not something, this is more of a planned backup. This is more of a planned automation, ZeroTouch. This is not going to be something where, you're going to have Avantra recognize that something happened and then go to a kernel update. So basically, what Avantra does is you can bring down that kernel package, put it in here and assign which servers you want it to do. Say you want it to do it this weekend, Saturday at 4 in the morning. You don't have to get up. You don't have to do anything. Avantra's just going to go do it itself. Essentially here, we'll see this example. What it did is it went out, looked, hey, is this the right kernel for this particular SAP system? It does some preparation, like doing a particular kernel draw and so forth. It looks at the users, brings the SAP system down, puts the new kernel in place, brings the SAP system back up and running, and away you go. But before it hands it back off, it does a little post-processing. Is everything up and running? Is everything okay? You should delete that backup drive, that backup of the last kernel if necessary. If everything did not work okay, does it need to do a rollback and actually go out and roll back to the former kernel? Essentially then does the cleanup. So all of this can be done as well, straight out of Avantra. You don't have to wake up and do that. Avantra will do all of that for you. So with that, this is our first drop-in session. I hope it was very valuable for everyone. Really focusing on that zero-touch automation. Hopefully we'll probably do once a time where we actually do the full touch automation where there is an approval process in there, actually, because that is very, very important for many organizations, but we want to kick this one off first. So please keep an eye out for all the future drop-in sessions that should be coming. And I think that's all. If you have any questions, thank you.